realfaith.org.au.
A friend who'd heard the choir, he started a cosmetic business, said, I want to give some of the support of my business to Watoto. Come and sing at the launch. So we came to this launch in London, and it was a wild event. They were drinking their cocktails and smoking their cigarettes, and it was loud and raucous. And then they brought the choir, and I turned to Marilyn, I said, watch this. And the choir started to sing, and it was like a vacuum sucked out that negative atmosphere.
Welcome to Real Faith, conversations about the impact faith has on our lives and the challenges we go through, helping us today and giving us hope for tomorrow. That's real people, real life, and real faith with Eric Scatterbo.
You are Yahweh, all powerful. There is no other God that can stand in your way.
That's the music of the Watoto Children's Choir from Uganda. You may have seen them perform at your local church. They've sung all over the world, including at the White House and before the Queen. But what is the story behind the choir and the Watoto Church that started it all? We'll find out today as I have a chat with the founders of Watoto Church, Gary and Marilyn Skinner. They're joining us from Sydney, where they're staying while they're visiting Australia. Gary and Marilyn, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be with you today.
It's wonderful to be with you.
Glad to have you with us. And you've written a book about the whole Watoto Church story called Where Faith Lit the Way. Is that right?
Yep. I was wanting to do that for a good number of years, but we handed the responsibility of Watoto over to the next generation of Ugandan leaders. And I knew if I didn't write that story, it would be forgotten, even though it's an amazing story.
Oh, we're so glad that you've gotten it all written down. We're going to find out more about the book and how the Watoto Church got started. But first, let's find out a little bit about your backgrounds. Where were you born and raised? Let's start with you, Marilyn.
Okay, well, I was born in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada. Very small community. My parents were pastors. My grandparents were pastors. I had a wonderful childhood.
Okay, and you, Gary?
I was born in Zimbabwe, Southern Africa. Grew up mostly in South Africa, sometime in Zambia. My parents were missionaries. My grandparents were missionaries, went to Africa in 1936. So I'm an African inside and outside.
And where were they from originally?
They were from Canada.
Okay.
They went to Canada in just before the war, Second World War.
And did you become a Christian at a young age?
I was raised in a Christian family, so at the age of 6, I made a commitment to Jesus. And then at the age of 16 at a youth camp, I made a fresh commitment. And that was really the start of the journey for me. I wanted to be a game warden. It's in the book. I wanted to be a game warden in the national park in South Africa. Oh. And God said, no, I don't want you to look after animals, look after people. I said, I don't want to do that. I don't like people. I like animals. Animals, you can shoot if they give you trouble. But people you got to love. That's too hard.
Yeah.
But you can't fight with God and win. So I went to Bible school in Canada, and the rest is history.
And Marilyn, when did you become a Christian?
I gave my heart to Jesus when I was 6 years old as well, and I've loved him ever since. And how did the two of you meet? We actually met in a Christian rock band when we were teenagers. It was during the day of the Jesus Revolution.
Yeah.
And an evangelist had a big truck, the sidewall folded down into a platform, and he was going to beaches, parks, tourist areas, prisons, schools, just to do evangelism. And he put together a rock group, and Gary was the guitar player, and I was the keyboard player.
I turned to look at her on the piano. She winked at me, and that was the end of it.
And then eventually, obviously, the two of you married. How did you end up in Uganda?
Well, we married, and then we pastored a couple of small churches in Canada, but I knew we were coming back to Africa, and I felt God call us to Africa. And so the missions department sent us to Zambia. And we were there 4 years. But one day while sitting around the table, just talking about life, Uganda came up in the conversation, and it was war, post-Idi Amin, million people killed. And God spoke to me and said, Gary, I want you to go to Kampala, plant an English-speaking church downtown. Through that church, I'll touch the city, I'll touch the nation. And it was a process that took us there, very dangerous. Our missions department didn't want to send us, but eventually agreed, and we went into a war-torn country and began to reach the youth of Uganda by planting an English-speaking church, and everything else has come out of that, what is now a great church.
Now, Marilyn, how did you feel about going to a war-torn country?
Well, to tell you the truth, I didn't want to go to Uganda. I had a few conversations with God because all I knew was, I'd seen on TV, Idi Amin had tied some nuns to a pole and mowed them down with AK-47s. And I remember thinking, oh, God, I'm going to be killed there. My children are going to be killed there. But, when I was 15 years old, I made a decision that I wanted to be more than a follower of Jesus Christ. I wanted to be a disciple. And, a follower only has to believe in their heart and confess with their mouth. But a disciple has to literally take the things that are dearest and best to them, whether plants or people, and kiss it goodbye. So I said, okay, Lord, here I am again. Whether I live or die, I'm yours. And so we went. But it was difficult. We were in the middle of civil war. We used to hear gunfire every single night across the city, across the street, sometimes right in our front yard. We used to drive around dead bodies just to get into town to do our groceries. And one night, we hadn't been in Uganda very long, only 3 months before we even started the church. And in the middle of the night, a gang of 25 men came to our house. Gary was away. I was all alone with the 3 kids. They were 4, 6, and 8. And for 3 hours, they tried to break down a simple wooden door that I could have broken down. They were pounding on that door saying, we're going to kill you. We're going to steal your things. I got my kids. I hid them underneath the bed, and I dragged furniture, barricaded myself in the bedroom. And I was terrified. I had one thing on my mind. I said, I cannot wait for Gary to get home. And when he gets home, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. I'm going to say, Gary, what kind of a crazy man could bring a wife and 3 kids to a place like this? You need me to take me back home to my mother right now. But I heard a voice. And that voice said, come on, get up, girl. Get up. I didn't bring you to Uganda to be paralyzed by fear. Because that's what fear does. It paralyzes you. It actually renders you impotent. You can't fulfill anything in life if you're paralyzed. God said, I didn't bring you here to be paralyzed by fear. I brought you here for a purpose. And I had to make a choice. I had to choose. Was my fear going to be stronger than my faith? Or was my faith going to be stronger than my fear? And I chose to believe that if Jesus could protect me that night, whether he had an angel up against the door, I don't know, but those men could not get in. But if Jesus could protect me that night, there's nothing in this world that he cannot do. And that's really what the book Faith Over Fear is about. It's about accounts of God stepping into the miraculous and changing impossible situations around for his glory. So the last 42 years that we've been in Uganda, we have literally with our eyes seen him move the immovable, break the unbreakable, and bring miracles out of the impossible.
Well, as we started this conversation talking about, everybody knows about the Watoto Children's Choir, but that kind of came later in the story. You had a number of ministries before that. How did it all start? How did it eventually grow up to the choir?
Well, we were growing the church, and then HIV/AIDS hit Uganda like a bomb. And the devastated nation was devastated even more by millions of people dying across Africa. We ended up with 2 million orphans in Uganda out of a population of 20 million people, child-headed households, children falling through the cracks, not going to school, living in extreme poverty, being shuffled off to extended family. And God said to me, I want you to look after. And he said, my children, not the children. I didn't want to do that. And he took me through the scripture and showed me how much he cared for hurting people, but especially the widow and the orphan. And then boiled it down to that one verse in James 1:27, the kind of religion that God the Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction and to keep yourself from being polluted by the world. And I knew we were to look after the children. So we started reaching the most vulnerable children. And over a period of a couple of years, the number of orphans grew that we were looking after, not in an orphanage, but in small homes that we built. And then God said to me, now I want you to take these kids around the world and I want you to tell the story of redemption, how God can take hurting people and redeem their lives. And that was the beginning of Watoto Children's Choir. Marilyn and I led the choir because we were musical.
Oh, yeah.
And the rest is now 130 choirs later. Amazing what God has done. And the thing is, it's not just a fundraising gimmick, although it certainly is a way that we find partners and sponsors. It's an amazing tool to tell the story of salvation. Last year, when the choir was here in Australia, 1,800 people in the concerts gave their lives to Christ.
Oh, wow.
As the kids told their story, hurting people just had a chance to be prayed for by children from Africa.
Yeah.
So the choir has become a real tool of hope and inspiration. Great music, inspirational, exciting to listen to, and we train young leaders out of the process too. So it's a great thing God did.
We're literally seeing people set free from bondages, chains that are ensnaring them as a result of the kids' choir. There's a verse in Psalms and it says, strength rises up with the chorus of singing children. And this kind of praise has the power to shut Satan's mouth. And that's what we've been seeing happen for the last 30 years of the choir.
We lift you up, our God.
Our guests today are the founders of the Watoto Church in Uganda, Gary and Marilyn Skinner. Their Watoto Children's Choir has performed all over the world, including at the White House and before the Queen. Gary has written a book about their experiences called Where Faith Lit the Way. We'll hear more insights from Gary and Marilyn, including the story behind the Children's Choir. All that and more is coming up when we return right here on Real Faith.
The Word for Today is Australia's most widely read daily devotional, designed to give you practical teaching to keep you focused on your relationship with Jesus. Read it online or subscribe to the free printed edition at thewordfortoday.com.au.
You're listening to Real Faith, conversations with real people about how God works in their lives. If you want to know more about integrating faith into your life, our website is realfaith.org.au. Just go to the website and you'll find helpful articles about the impact faith can have on your life. Once again, that's realfaith.org.au.
Welcome back. I'm Eric Scadabo, and today I'm chatting with Gary and Marilyn Skinner. They're the founders of the Watoto Church in Uganda, and their Watoto Children's Choir has performed all over the world and probably at a church near you. Before the break, we heard a bit of Gary and Marilyn's backgrounds, with both of them having connections to Canada. Now we're going to hear more about their unique church and more about the Watoto Children's Choir as our conversation continues.
You are Yahweh, all powerful. There is no other God that can stand in your way.
Now let's talk about some of the other ministries that you have kind of behind the scenes that don't get as much attention as the choir. You've helped out a number of single ladies, is that right?
Yeah, a few years ago, I heard a God whisper. And God said to me, usually he talks to Gary and says, I want you to do this. And Gary comes to me and says, God told me to do this, let's do this. But I really heard God say, you know what, sweetie, don't get too comfortable. I have something else I want you to do. I want you to begin to restore dignity to Uganda's most vulnerable women. They had recently found oil in Uganda, and the whole country was ecstatic. They were celebrating because of the greatest resource they thought they had. But, I don't believe that the oil is the greatest resource Africa has. I believe her greatest resource is her women waiting to be empowered. And there were millions of women who had been left abandoned. They were HIV positive. They hadn't even gone to school. They couldn't read or write. They couldn't even tell time. So we began to just reach out to them, give them life skills, embrace them, empower them so that they could live a sustainable life of dignity and look after their own kids. So we've come alongside about 9,000 women so far. And then we've also started to help keep girls in school, because in northern Uganda, girls were dropping out of school. In grade 1, there'd be 100 girls. By the time they reached grade 6, there was only 7 girls left. And it was because when they got their periods, they didn't have any supplies. So they would just drop out of school. And if you drop out of school, before you know it, you're married off or you're pregnant. So education isn't just, key to a brighter future. It's actually critical. It's key to their survival. So we began to keep girls in school by just providing simple sanitary pads and panties and a bar of soap every month. And today we're keeping over 10,000, 12,000 girls in school every single month. Those are just 2 of the things that we do.
And then there was a war in northern Uganda. The Lord's Resistance Army abducted 40,000 children, turned them into child soldiers, weapons of terror against northern community, their own villages, their own families. Some of our kids were abducted in that process. And so God said, I want you to intervene there. So we went to northern Uganda, and We were able to rescue just over 500 of the children that had got out, but were in extreme trauma. We got involved in community trauma counseling because grandparents, parents had felt like they'd failed. They hadn't protected their children from being stolen. And so we began a process of going into rural Uganda and doing whole village would come for trauma counseling. And many of them would receive Christ. And it's been a process of a church doing much more than just having Sunday church. It's about a church caring for the real needs of the people in the community. And that really has become the heart of Watoto. It's not only about celebrating Christ, but it's about caring for community. And we feel very strongly that the church worldwide needs to be doing that within their own communities. Wherever there is pain, get involved. And that's the story of Watoto.
Yeah, so you could have said, well, we have a church and we do our thing on Sunday and we have our ministries. And meanwhile, there's these problems in society. But you decided, no, we're going to get involved.
And it's my opinion that nobody does it better than the church. I don't think governments do social intervention better. I don't think even the experts that are coming out of university with social degrees do any better. There is a solution, and it's found in the scripture: loving people, coming to a place of forgiveness, getting over bitterness, forgiving yourself for your own failures, embracing the hurting, the wounded. Anybody can do that. You don't need a degree from university to love people. And the church is the most powerful influence that can take the love of God, the love of Jesus, and we've all experienced it, received it ourselves. Now we can pass it on to others. And in practical ways, not just in counseling ways, but helping people with their real needs. A lot of hurting people. The solution is the church, Jesus.
So you've seen a lot of needs in the community, and you decided to get involved in helping out and solve those needs, or at least lessen the load a bit.
Yeah, well, and it's in the book again. One chapter is about how we got involved in community work. Jesus said to me, who do you think owns community? And I said, well, government or the people. He said, no, Gary, I own the community. I own everything. He said, if the community has problems, whose problems are they? I thought, well, like we all do, the government's problems. He said, no, they're my problems. And who am I going to give them to? I'm going to give them to my people. I want you to reach out to the hurting and the lonely. And so it was a process of changing our whole perspective on what ministry is. Not just going to church, but being the church. And it's not a program of the church. It's about inspiring the whole church to get involved. So we started small groups. We have almost 3,000 small groups in our church. And every small group identifies the need in their community through a family that's suffering, or a widow that's suffering, or children that are suffering, and they are the conduit for how they get involved. And then we as a church are involved in the whole process of counseling and training. And it's people reaching people, not just a program of the church.
Now, Marilyn, I was wondering if you have a favorite story of a young lady that you've helped or come across along the way.
Oh, there's so many. One of my favorite stories, her name is Irene. She was from northern Uganda, Gulu. She was abducted when she was 12 years old. She watched her mother and her grandmother be beaten in front of her. She was tied up with ropes, forced to walk for 24 hours up to southern Sudan. On the way, her little sister got tired because they took all the kids from their family. Her little sister got tired, and the soldiers literally beat her to death. So Irene stayed in the bush, 12 years old. When she was 13, she had a baby. After about 4 years, she managed to escape. She ran away. She, in the middle of a battle with her little baby, she walked for 4 months to get back to Uganda. And when she got back to Uganda, she found out that her mother and her grandmother had both died. A week later, her little baby died. And the week after that, I showed up and found her. And as she cried to me, she said, Auntie Marilyn, all I ever wanted to do was go to school and be a normal girl. All I ever wanted to do was to be a nurse. And so through Watoto, we were able to put her back in school. We were able to send her to university. And today, Irene is actually a social worker on the border of South Sudan and Uganda, helping refugees as they come across the border who are suffering like she was. And the best part of the story is she just sent me a photo and she said, guess what? I'm getting married in 3 months to a wonderful young man.
Fantastic. I mean, you're telling us about some of these horrific things that have happened, And then you see the bright smiling faces on the choir. That's quite a contrast between the two.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, how did you come up with the idea for a choir in the first place? It sounds like you're pretty busy at the moment. And to add that on top of it, why did you start the choir?
It was a Jesus thing. He said, I want you to put the children together in a choir and tell the story, not a sad story, but a glad story. Not a boo-hoo, poor us story, but a redemption story. And just stand up and speak for those that cannot speak for themselves. And through that process, we came to Australia. And I got to tell you, as we stood up and for whatever you want to say, we connected with Hillsong, and Hillsong just became a partner with us and opened up the world for us, because we were able to take the choir to the church, and then Marilyn spoke at their conferences, and they took up the cause of the orphan and the poor and the refugee, and they've helped us in so many ways over the years. So Australia has become a real blessing to Watoto. And in the process too, Watoto has been a great blessing to the church in Australia. It's just a partnership. Together we can do this. The church is the most powerful, influential, the best solution for situations, whether you're in Africa or Australia.
And as we heard on the introduction, Watoto has sung before the Queen and in the White House and before parliaments all over the world. What is your favorite choir story?
Favorite choir story. My favorite choir story is we were invited to go to the opening of a new business in London. A friend who'd heard the choir, he started a cosmetic business, said, I want to give some of the support of my business to Watoto. Come and sing at the launch. Well, the company that set up the launch said, you can't do that. These people listen to their music. It's all Jesus stuff. You can't have this at your launch. He phoned me, he said, what do I do? I said, well, you have to decide. But if you honor God, he'll look after you. So he said, no, you're coming. So we came to this launch in London, and it was a wild event. The London people were so artsy. They were dressed or undressed in various states, and they were drinking their cocktails and smoking their cigarettes, and it was loud and raucous. And then they brought the choir, and I turned to Marilyn and I said, watch this. And the choir started to sing, and it was like a vacuum sucked out that negative atmosphere, and heaven opened up, and the presence of God filled that whole room. And you watched these people who were living in a very different world, a different culture, just their jaws drop as they experience the presence of God, because that's what happens when you sing and worship Jesus, especially with children. And then they started to get involved, and then they were clapping, and they cheered for them when they were finished. And then this little girl comes over to this lady that I was standing with, one of the choir girls, and said, excuse me, ma'am, my name's so-and-so. What's your name? So-and-so. She said, and can I tell you something? When you smoke that cigarette, you don't make Jesus happy. I thought, wow.
Yeah.
And she said, your body was made by God for good things, not for dirty things. And this lady says, sweetheart, you're absolutely right. When I smoked the cigarette, I don't make Jesus happy. She stubs it out. She calls the photographer, says, please, can you take a picture with this little girl and me? And it's a story of how simple children's faith can transform atmosphere and opens doors. And that's been the amazing thing about the choir, is that they can do and get away with telling it a whole lot better way than we ever can.
And what's the future for the two of you?
Well, with exactly this. We want to come to places like Australia, different places, and encourage the local church to be what God has called it to be, the hope of their community. And partnering with Watoto is just part of that, but it's about the DNA of the church, living out the culture of Christ in community, bringing about community transformation by loving our community. And we do that through the choir and the stories and all the rest, but we want to encourage. The church has been marginalized by much of the secular left as irrelevant, and Jesus is irrelevant. That nothing could be further from the truth. What every nation needs is the character of God, the character of Christ, which is love and justice and kindness and goodness and faith and forgiveness and patience and generosity. Those things can transform a nation. But a secular society becomes greedy and self-centered and trying to just satisfy and comfort ourselves, and we don't really care about other people. Let the government do that. But we need to change that so we want to encourage the church. Be the church. How? Not just good services on Sunday. Love people all around you. Get in the community like Jesus did.
And specifically, what's the future of the Watoto Church that you founded?
We handed the responsibilities over to Julius and Vernita, young couple that are our disciples, came to Christ in the church when they were just children and grew up through the whole process. And now it's, of course, a multi-campus large church, and they're doing a terrific job. All the church is now led by Ugandans at every level, and it's just flying.
So it's good to know that, when the founders are gone, it's not going to just end right there. It's carrying on.
No way.
It's about Jesus living in all of us. We're together. We're a team. It's not about us, not about Marilyn and I. We're just ordinary people that God allowed to see extraordinary things happen. And it's about raising the next generation of Ugandan leaders who can build a new Africa. And that's the dream we've planted in that local church in Kampala.
Gary and Marilyn, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
You're welcome. Great pleasure for us. Thank you for honoring us with the opportunity.
Well, that was my conversation with the founders of the Watoto Church in Uganda, Gary and Marilyn Skinner. And as we heard, their Watoto Children's Choir has performed all over the world. If you would like to learn more about Gary and Marilyn's story and the story behind the church and choir, you can read their book. It's called Where Faith Lit the Way by Gary Skinner. It's available online at amazon.com.au. Once again, the book is called Where Faith Lit the Way by Gary Skinner. Also, to learn more about Watoto in general and all their ministries, the website is watotochurch.com. Once again, that's watotochurch.com. Well, thank you so much for joining us for the story of the Watoto Children's Choir and the founders of the Watoto Church in Uganda, Gary and Marilyn Skinner. Until next time, I'm Eric Scadavo. So long, and God bless.
You've been listening to Real Faith, and if you had any questions or comments, you can send us a message through our website, realfaith.org.au. That's realfaith.org.au.
Real Faith is a production of Vision Christian Media.
This program is a production of Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, see vision.org.au.